Now,
Yeah.
Solihin, tell us, when did you first come across the notion of proprioception?
Whoa, I guess the first year, second year at osteopathic school. To be really honest, I don't think I took very much in. I don't think I really got it. You know, I was just a student. I was learning facts. It was rather dry and mechanical. It had no human understanding to it. It was basically a mechanical mechanism by which it was the idea that you had these neurons and receptors that basically recorded where you were in space. I mean, that was basically what it was, and it allowed you to orientate yourself. But it didn't have any sort of human content. It was really about the animal part of us. So I'm absolutely sure I didn't take very much notice. But gradually, through the development of the work that we did, proprioception became more and more. It was like I sort of had a cogent understanding, not an inner understanding, but a sort of intellectual understanding of proprioception, and then it morphed slowly into me as a human being in space. That's something that's really been developing the last 10 years, I guess.
And when you talk about your work, you're talking about ontological kinesiology.
Yes, I am. I actually never really call it ontological kinesiology. I call it inner dialogue, because the work allows us to hear the dialogue from inside, from within. The ontological kinesiology is basically the toolbox through which we find that narrative. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when you were going to school, had you been opened in Subud?
Oh yes, I was opened in 73, and I went to school in 76. So I'd had 3 years of a really sort of a very sort of sad time in a way, because I wasn't really receiving very much initially. It was a sort of a dead space. I'd go to Latin and nothing would happen. All these people wandering around making noises and dancing, and I was sort of standing like a lemon. But actually, all the time, I knew something had happened, but thank God, actually. And I sort of persevered over the years.
Did you say you were standing like a lemon?
I did say that. don't know where that expression came from, but anyway, like a lemon. Well, you know, sort of something hanging from a tree, basically.
Low-hanging fruit. There you have it.
Yeah, well, there you are. So, I'm a lemon. I think don't we say something's a lemon when it's not very good?
And an automobile that you buy, if it doesn't work,
That's
they in many states back in the day had lemon laws. So maybe we ought to have that in Subud. We need one rule: you can't be a lemon in Latihan.
Well, I was completely, but I always knew that actually inside it was just time, and then I had a whole series of experiences. I actually had experiences before I was opened, and then when I was opened, nothing happened. so it was very interesting. I actually think I was opened right from the get-go when I first had my first talk with Subud members. They were helpers, and they went along, asked them what Subud was, and some chap sort of off the top of his head just sort of said it's the power of Almighty God, something like that. And I experienced sort of coming out of my body and then being about 200 foot tall. It was an extraordinary experience, looking down at these three men and myself, and not really realizing anything at that moment, but having that experience and then coming down. And the same experience happened when I became a Muslim, actually. And so exactly the same thing. I came out of my body, looked down, and I was sort of rather thin. I wasn't very large, but I was tall and extended. So it was an extraordinary experience, actually. So that sort of held me instead for the last, whatever it is, 40 odd years.
Yeah. And I'm thinking that while you're in school and you're hearing this about proprioception and it's kind of dry, there was something in you that was already a Subud person with 3 years of Latihan experience. So on some level, it's not really relating to where you were as a human because of having been open in Subud and the understanding of Latihan Kejiwan and the possibilities therein. And maybe that your schooling was still leaning a little bit more toward the allopathic than you would
Oh,
feel in
of
your
course.
deepest self. Yeah.
Oh yes, without a shadow of doubt. Actually, when I graduated, of course, the idea of what I'd learned was that this was a preparation for what I was going to be learning when I left school, which is exactly what happened. I mean, I think I just let it all go and started to explore myself. And in a way, I was given the information. I never sort of went out searching for it. I was not a terribly good student. So I didn't go hunting for information, but as I was working with people, the understanding came to me. So I think that's the sort of consequence of Subud, actually, or the receiving.
So then, as we talk about what proprioception is, we have a series of Facebook messages. I'll share real quick so we can see what they are here.
Yes.
Proprioception. Hi, Paul. Proprioception is basically one's animal awareness of your body in space. It is a state of consciousness of how we move through space. And when we talk about space here, we're not talking about outer space. We're talking about terrestrial, being on the planet. At our instinctual,
Absolutely, in your house, in your car,
in your heart,
etc.
exactly, yes. So space being air, the atmosphere.
Yeah.
At our instinctual level, it's our ability to move around without damaging ourselves. At a human level, it is our ability to engage with the other rather than the herd. At a noble level, we upgrade it to allow us to move around and through space. You talk about those different levels. For those who aren't Subud people, these are references to the hierarchy of life forces that is widely used in Subud and comes out of Islam.
It came out of Islamic thought, Christian thought, Kabbalistic thought, Neoplatonic ideas. I mean, it's really very old. It's not the property of a particular religion, but religions have taken the information because it actually made sense that we had this outer form and inner natures, if you like, and those natures consisted of levels of being or realms. So when I mentioned the idea that it's for our animal, I mean, at one level it's also vegetative because it's part of our neurological system. So it's not only a primitive system of awareness, it's a sophisticated system of awareness which is animal. It's a cognitive awareness, being human. And at a noble level, it is the ability to pass, P-A-R-S-E, space. In other words, to be aware of the inner natures of other people and their state, etc., and not to invade, to be empathetic, to be fully present with someone else, and to be fully present with the unseen forces, the angelic forces, the lower forces, the forces that create our huge world that we live in.
It's safe to say that Vladimir Putin is not operating in a way that his proprioception is working for him in that manner.
No, I think his proprioception is down below his trousers. Actually, he's just, unfortunately, he's a man who's obsessed with his size, and he's a small man. As someone said today, he's a small man with feral eyes, which is a bit cruel, to be really honest, because he's quite Slavic in looks. And when I was in Russia, I saw a lot of people who looked like me. So I have Slavic blood in me, but I think that Putin has a worldview. But it's held by the past. It's held by Russian imperialistic models of conquering, and having a huge empire, and he wants to get that back. So he's playing who's got the biggest. I think it's probably the expression.
And so back to proprioception. Then I asked you if there had been any study of a Subud approach to proprioception, and then to go back to your Facebook message. No study at all. Any training in sensitivity will train the proprioception, Tai Chi, for example, because it's a series of prescribed movements. The Gurdjieff movements would do the same. Latihana's freeform. So on the other hand, it's movement guided by the inner, hopefully. So it will combine an awareness of external environmental shapes, configurations, obstacles, etc. Proprioception is what goes awry as we get older. Don't break your ankle when in your 70s or later. So
That was just a little subnote from me, having broken my ankle
I
last year.
see, I see. So you feel that your proprioception is not as accurate or healthy or as what would be the word you would use for that?
Well, at that moment last year, when I turned 71 on that day, and I fell off some stairs actually outside. And the answer is that I stupidly, well, first of all, I stupidly was wearing some shoes not properly, so they were half on my feet. So, and I turned, and the shoes stayed where they are, and my body went the wrong way. So anyway, I fell and broke my ankle, and it was very sore. And I've had basically, it's taken me a whole year to put my body back into shape. And I realized that actually it is about my animal nature. It is about my awareness. It is about who I am. So it was a wake-up call. It was a really good part of my own process, because the ankle bone basically sets, if I'm an animal, I've got 4 legs, but as a human, I've only got 2. So the ankle bone has a huge number of proprioceptors embedded in the cartilage, embedded in the ligaments and the tendons, etc. And so all the time, your sort of neocortex, actually your sort of what's called the motor cortex, is receiving information all the time and sending information back almost instantaneously to have all your muscles reorganize and make sure you don't fall. Well, I fell, so it was telling me something about my neurology. So at one level it was a blessing, at another level it's been bloody sore.
Yeah, we learn best through pain, don't we?
Unfortunately, sometimes, yes.
So you mentioned that there are many proprioceptors in the ankle. What is the science that informs us where these proprioceptors are?
What is the science? That's a slightly obscure statement for me. Apart from the fact that we have proprioceptors in every single one of our ligaments, tendons, joints, organs, everywhere. Basically we have an array of sensory receptors that are constantly monitoring every part of our body, our movements. Our axial skeleton is constantly being minutely reorganized, constantly, because we're feeding back all the time to our motor cortex. So that's the animal aspect of us. Now, if you were to practice Gurdjieff movements, or if you were to practice Tai Chi, or any complex dance movement, ballet, for example, you are basically, in a way, overriding some of those reflex mechanisms, but refining them at the same time. So you're sort of going beyond the norm. So your body's saying, hey, you're going to fall, but actually what you as the human is doing says, no, I'm not going to fall, I'm going to do this pirouette, I'm going to do this jump, I'm going to do this particular movement. So you're refining your proprioceptors, you're actually upgrading it. And I think that's the important bit.
Yoga also might be one of these practices that helps.
Absolutely. Yoga is a bit more sort of static and stationary, although of course there are yogas that are about movement, and there's all sorts of different interior meditations, for example, that refine our proprioception, because it's about movement as well as walking through space or going on a walk or whatever, but your mind is in a particular sort of zone, if you like, and your body is reflectively working in relationship to your mind rather than the other way around. Normally, our animal is constantly making sure that we're not going to put a nail through its hoof. So proprioceptors are there to help the animal move through space, but it's also that the proprioceptors send out an immediate alarm system when actually the animal has hurt itself. So what happens is that as you put down your foot, your forefoot or your hind foot onto a barbed piece of wire or whatever, and you hurt yourself, what happens is the whole body just gives away, because another reflex has told the body, don't hold that position, drop away, release those muscles, and it's an instantaneous process. So we have a highly, highly developed survival mechanism in the proprioceptive mechanism, as well as what we call the nociceptors and pain receptors and receptors that are aware of an organ in space, for example. So your kidneys and your liver and your heart are all suspended on ligaments, but they know where they are. They know where they should be in space. And of course, sickness is when those very sensitive neurons just don't send out the signal. So your heart gets twisted, your kidneys drop, your colon starts to mold into another part of it. So there's all sorts of proprioceptors, if you like, or sophisticated proprioceptors throughout the body.
When I hear you speak just now, I think about athletes, and I think about muscle memory, and I think about my own experiences. Thursday night playing basketball and knowing when my feet are square to the hoop and I set myself and I make the shot and it swishes, which is one of the most beautiful feelings you can have, to hear that swish go through when you're trying to. I've experienced it in golf. I've experienced it in softball in other ways. And athletes talk about this kind of muscle memory. So how does that relate?
Well, what you're doing is that the proprioceptors have been trained in a particular sort of series of vectors. So you just said basically, here's my stance, here's my posture, here's what I do with my hand, here's the throw. Your body has that sort of trained into itself. So basically the proprioceptors say, this is what happens, this is what happens, this is what happens, this is what happens. And of course it's coming from here rather than local. It's not a local process. You are dictating the movement that you want to happen. I mean, that's the beauty of us as animals and the beauty of us as human beings. Animals don't shoot, what's it called, ball?
Basketballs?
I'm afraid you're talking to someone who's never thrown a basketball.
Well, you shoot it. That's the first thing. It's not thrown necessarily, right. but I hear what you're saying. There was another little paragraph that you shared with me today, so I'm going to pull that up and have you read it, since I've not read it yet. So.
Yes, this mode is about space and our ability to navigate through space and over terrain. In a way, it's just what we've just been talking about. Proprioceptors allow us to be upright and organize our movement and to know where to place our limbs. I mean, that's the given. These reflexes are closely associated with our gait, which is movement, and cloaca, which is our ability to release fecal matter and being able to pee, not necessarily on the move, but actually we could. And spatial awareness becomes disarranged. Now, what did I say that? So that no, I've jumped. These reflexes are closely associated with our gait and cloaca. Yeah. They're switches, yes. So switches basically is that you can switch off your proprioceptors. And that's a sort of quality of us humans, is that the trauma of any sort, whether it's abuse or whether it's a fall, a bit like me falling off a wall, falling off some stairs. I basically switched off my proprioceptors because of the fall and then the twist in the foot and the break in the bone. So those proprioceptors just didn't function. So I had to learn how to walk again. And to put my feet down squarely and to lift them up, and etc., etc. So yes, you can switch off. And when we switch off, it changes every single part of our body. So if it's a foot, or if it's an ankle, or if it's a hip, or if it's a shoulder, whatever it is, it will have a corresponding relationship with another set of proprioceptors in another part of the body. So, for example, hip and shoulder are if I'm an animal, I have those two contralateral mechanisms working at the same time. If I'm wanting to move through space, I need my shoulder and my hip to work in the same way. I need my shoulder and my hip to go parallel, and that's what we normally do. Well, if you switch something off, that gait alters, and if that gait alters, then your spine alters. And if your spine alters, then your neurology alters. If your neurology alters, then your blood supply alters. If your blood supply alters, your organ system starts to not work as efficiently as it should or ought. So there is a whole sort of sequence, a cascade effect, when we disorganize these primitive but very, very sophisticated aspects of ourselves. So I think that's what I was writing. If you put that back and let me see what else.
I'll put it back, and you can finish it off. Yeah.
Trauma of any sort can disorganize them, so that our gait and spatial awareness becomes disarranged. Yeah, and we become clumsy, haphazard, and prone to further injury. Well, sure. What I've done there is to illustrate the cascade effect right throughout your body. And as osteopaths, you can see why osteopathic modeling is about the structure of the body. And if you sort out the structure of the body, then by default you reorganize the proprioceptors, the pain receptors, all these extraordinary receptors that are constantly feeding back information about who we are and what we are as an animal system and a physiological system.
Yeah. And there's so many questions that come up for me. What is it like for someone, for example, with MS? What, in terms of Latihan, I've heard Bapak once said Latihan is about being at home in your own body, is another thing that comes to mind. So I don't know, maybe you could take both those questions on.
Ooh, well, you're asking me to pronounce a very controversial sort of idea or thought.
Is this regarding DMS?
Well, MS or ALS or any of these neurological processes are interesting because, first of all, our neurology is what gives us autonomy as a human being, autonomy as an instinctual, survival-orientated organism, which is the animal part of us, and basically also allows our neurology to make sure that our physiology is working properly. So you always have this sort of cascade effect. So when we affect our motor system, which is what MS, for example, or ALS is doing, what are we doing? If we're talking about things in sort of subud context, you are in effect knocking out the animal part of yourself. Your animal is being reduced to not being able to walk or to move through space efficiently. Now, you can then say, well, perhaps that person's instinctual nature was so strong that the divine, that God, that destiny or fate has created the environment for this MS or this ALS to manifest. Okay? And that's a pretty hard thing for people to hear, because it means that illness is something that you are given, in some cases, as a lesson. Because if your animal nature is so strong and it's reduced to being in a wheelchair or being unable to really maneuver, then what you've got is your feelings, your vegetative part of yourself, your awareness, and your intellect. But the sort of the driving mechanism, the survival mechanism, is reduced to being in a chair or a bed or whatever. And so that's a sort of existential question. which you're asking me. It's difficult, and I'm sure there'll be people, if they listen to this, will be up in arms. And I'm not sure if I'm correct at all. It's just a supposition. What else did you ask me? You asked me something else.
Doing Latihan is about getting you to be able to
Yes.
feel at home in your body.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, if you've got these illnesses, etc., and you're able to do Latihan, your Latihan takes you into your soul, and when your soul is present, then actually your body doesn't matter so much, and you're preparing yourself for your eventual death, which is the one thing that we all are sure about. So at some implicit level, it could be that illness is a gift for some people. I personally think that it can be a gift, but it can also be, unfortunately, someone's, what's the best word to explain it? It could be fate, i.e., a person has lived a particular type of life and their body hasn't taken well to it, and it starts to, fail. So illness is a sort of strange one. It can be fated. You can be fated to have something, or you can be part of your destiny. So I think there are two ways of looking at it. But Latihan is the thing that takes us into our inner self, and that's quite different from our outer body.
But then Walt Whitman said, "I am the poet of the body, and I am the poet of the soul," and it was inclined to allow us to believe that those are the same thing. Michael McClure said the body is the soul, the intelligent body. So we hear poets opining on this, and I think that there's something more to it than a rhetorical stance.
I think you're quite right. I think that the body is our vehicle for our soul to whisper or shout or sing the beauty of creation, for sure. Absolutely, for sure. But as we get older and we start to involute into our essence, then perhaps illness is something that takes us or gives us the capacity to go into our essence. And sometimes, people live lives where they forget to go into their essence. So maybe illnesses are ways that help people to come back to themselves.
Sort of rerouting systems.
Yes.
Possibilities for rerouting.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is existential questions and ideas and thoughts. I honestly can't tell you what is true or what is just me rambling at this time.
Yeah. However, you have given us some ideas that if we were to develop a Tai Chi practice or a yoga practice or do the Gurdjieff movements or become if not professional dancers, practices like improvisations, contact improvisation, which is in many towns, in many big cities in North America and Europe, you can find places that have these open jams where people are improvising with each other via movement, which would seem to me be a proprioception building kind of thing.
I think you're correct, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's probably a lot more where this came from. I would really like to find definitive sources on proprioception. I'm reading The Senses Considered as Perceptual Systems by James Gibson, Cornell University, first published in 1966. So that I'm finding to be very interesting. And I've gone through the introduction, which was a little on the academic side, and fighting every urge to underline or highlight because it's a library book.
But I think just to add to your sort of thoughts about, people can go and do contact sports or dancing or ballet or play golf or some sort of activity that can develop their proprioception. But you can also develop it through being aware of all the nuances of proprioception and all the receptors that we have in our body. It's not, the thing is that, yes, we have proprioceptors, but we also have all these other receptors in our body that give us information. And it's the development of those as well as the proprioceptors that is the important piece here. And that, so people talking about empathy, for example, and can you develop empathy? Well, the answer is yes, you can develop empathy. But how do you do that? well, you become aware of the sort of signaling mechanism of other animals around us, other humans around us. And when we can tune into and be also discriminate about what we tune into, in other words, that the inner self is guiding us to know when to tune into, then actually what happens is that people's information come to us, and suddenly we are aware of the other in a completely different way. Now that is also a sort of sublime level of awareness and proprioception, because suddenly you're in that person's space. And so, I mean, I've been training people for the last 25, 30 years in that, and seen remarkable results in people. So they're not dancing, they're not doing Tai Chi, they're not doing Gurdjieff work, they're not necessarily doing ladder hand, but what they are doing is inner work where their full apparatus of their neurology is working for them, so that they become alive to what's around them, and to be given information when required. I think that's the important bit. I mean, a lot of people pick up stuff all the time and it's absolutely useless, but when you pick it up when it's necessary, it's fantastic.
What's absolutely useless then becomes fodder for social media.
Indeed.
However, you're suggesting that the capacity to develop one's perception and deploy it in poetry is a very real thing, and it has to do
Sure.
with developing a sort of kinesthetic intelligence. Is just what we're talking about here. Yes,
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very highly underrated quality, actually. Yeah, sure.
underrated because we value the intellect too much in Western culture.
Yes, absolutely. Not a bad thing to value, but actually we should be valuing all of our qualities. And I see that people divide themselves up as sort of saying, well, I'm kinesthetic, I'm auditory, I'm visual, etc., etc. And I think we should probably be developing all of these qualities inside us.